Okay, right on. Sure. So I'm ready to get into it now. We've got the audio all set up. So and let me put you let me actually move my screen over this way so that I can get so that it looks like I'm looking at you when I'm looking at you. Okay, great. So you're right here. Okay, cool. So you are Thomas, Matthew, and so could you tell me like what year you are in university and what your major is? Okay, got it. So third year, and what's the school? USC. Okay, wow. So probably one of the best game development schools out there. And so you're in your third year now. And you know you want to do games. And what made that decision for you? How'd you decide? Okay. Are these projects all related to your school? Or okay. Okay, got it. Yeah, there's a lot to dive into there. Okay. And so so you've been in college for 3 years. Have you been doing any internships or do you have any work experience? Okay. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's no easy way to say it. You're in a difficult position. This is your third year. This is the last opportunity you have to do an internship before basically you graduate, you know. So so yeah, I definitely understand the gravity of the situation here. And the other thing I want, so you worked at tech companies. What kind of is that on your resume? Maybe it'd be useful to start looking into that. But I'm just curious if that was what you were doing there, because I think you mentioned something like you're working at tech companies, but you want to do something that's more design. You don't see yourself as a gameplay engineer or a network engineer. What's your dream role, or you're not sure? That's definitely running through my head a little bit. So your dream job is creative director. Is that right? Is that the title you would want? Is that what you mean by creative? Okay. Like managing the schedules of the game. Okay. I think I understand what you're saying. And so, is there a particular kind of game in mind, or even a particular game in mind that you know you'd want to work on that kind of game? Because this industry has a lot of different kinds of games. Or no? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So you, when you think about that first role you would want to have, I guess that's what we're talking about then. In this, so we want to be at AAA. We want to be working on, I guess, a relatively large company if they could afford. Um, well, and you would want to be a designer, or do you know what kind of design you like? There's quite a few. The kind that you were talking about with retention and stuff, that sounds like a free to play mobile game or something like that. Okay, got it. All right, so we're trying to become a game design intern, and you are not interested in technical design, or maybe. Sure. Have you used the Unreal Engine? Okay. Um. Interesting. Okay, so I guess the big difference is technical designer's script. So it's kind of like basic programming. Scripting will probably be somewhat technical, and you would have to. I mean, it's going to be different on every game, right? But the most common example would be something like the programmers give you some utilities to use, and then the scripters are then in charge of actually implementing it. And whereas a designer versus a technical designer, is somebody who might sort of fine tune just the numbers, work less, I think, a little bit on the implementation. But that's a little reductive, of course. Okay, cool. So yeah, I think design is what we're talking about here. Awesome. So you've got this past experience and you are applying to internships as a game designer. How many internships have you applied to so far? Okay. So none just yet. Okay. Got it. Yeah, I think that's probably the main thing that I have to work with students on is just especially at these when they're working on these small teams that kind of wear a lot of hats. They might be the designer and the programmer and the artist or something like that, and so they want to build themselves as that. But really, um, it's a matter of choosing which one you want to specialize in if you're going to work on a team as big as a AAA team. So cool. So I think I've got a good feel for what you're looking for. You want to be a designer, a game design intern. Awesome. So can I see your resume and portfolio? Okay, cool. Awesome. So maybe I could share my screen and just sort of uh, let you know what I'm seeing. Okay. Wow, this is beautiful art. I like that. No, that's fair. That's fair. But people will look at the visuals and stuff like that. Yeah, right on. Okay, cool. So we could talk about this for a little while, but I think we should address. Okay, so first things first. Here's just my feedback for the portfolio. Um, somewhere here it needs to say you're a designer. Okay, it doesn't say that. It just says you're Tom Ling. So we should have something like Tom Ling, video game designer, something like that. Discover everything. It seems a little vapid. So I think just cut this whole section. We don't need it, or whatever these buildings are. Just don't need it. Um, this link just links to the only page there is, so you probably don't need the links up there. Okay, about myself. My name is Tom Ling. I'm a current junior at USC studying this and this. Okay, you could remove communications. Just say you're studying game design. That's the relevant part. I'm constantly invested in the world of entertainment, media, and gaming. I'm a live streamer, speedrunner, musician, esports participant, content creator, and learning to master 2D and 3D along with writing. Okay, cool. There's a lot of stuff there. I think that's great. I think a sentence before I'm a live streamer should say, like, as a game designer, these are the works I've made, or something like that. Because I want you to really convince me you're a game designer before you start talking about all this other stuff, because I'm going to be worried that you're not so much a game designer. I think these pictures of you should be removed. I think we don't need them. I think we need to jump into your work. So the resume is great. I think it would be nice to have a secondary link. Maybe if you're going to do portfolio up here, you could do another thing that's like a link to the resume. Um, okay, cool. And then we'll look at the resume too. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But let me look at some of this other stuff first. Um, okay, cool. So game work. Da, 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 da. Okay, great. So game work, right? Dormivigla. So this needs to, okay, great. So this is what we need to see. So the most relevant thing always comes first, right? And for you, that's always going to be design. So you're never going to put a word like writer before a word like designer. Always that comes first. Um, and so you've got a Kickstarter that's dope. So how'd that go? What's going on here? Okay, got it. Cool. So you raised some money. Wow. Okay. Well, that's not bad. Okay, great. So you did that. Awesome. So so what I need here is a paragraph of like what you did, what you learned, and why I should hire you, basically. You know what I mean? So it needs to be under Dorm Veglia. It should be like, on Dorm Veglia, I worked as the concept designer, um, focusing on this and this and this. Concept design, I'm not actually familiar with that as a title. So what did you concept? Okay, Okay, cool. So maybe you could say something like level designer or combat designer. I'm familiar with those terms a little bit more. I think that might sell a little bit more than concept designer because when I hear concept, I'm thinking VizDev, like art. So I think we might saying one of those other keywords might be closer to where we want to be. And then you've got a little Twitter for this too. Okay, that's cool. Right. So the relevant part here that we're missing is like, what did you do, and why does that make me want to hire you, basically? I wish that this was design, and then so here's like some relevant design documentation. I think this is awesome. So this is stuff that you wrote. Okay, cool. I like that. I think that's really cool. Like, I love being able to see your work. I do wish to some degree that it was designed in such a way that like I'm not scrolling all the way down like to each one of these things. Um, like maybe it could have like a maybe like what you could do up here is you could do a grid of like 3 by 3 and each one's a different game and then I could click one and then I could come down to this section. It's just I find that these categories are not like separating well enough for me. And maybe what would also help is just for a particular game, you have a background splash. So you can imagine that the section I've highlighted right here, like that section all has like a purple BG background. And then like I scroll down here and now I'm on a pink BG, so I realize okay, I'm in a new game that I'm talking about here because I'm finding that they're squeezed a little bit too much. I actually kind of like that it's one contiguous page. I think that's nice because it'll decrease because there's some friction associated with like clicking through a link for each thing. But it's just a little bit hard to tell them apart, I think. You might also, I mean, uh, considering how it's laid out, you might even be able to do sort of like two columns, which might be nice. I think also like the game could take up less vertical space. Um, like this this picture and this video are like the same thing, kind of. I mean, you could remove one, or you could just have them side by side, and it would still be, I think, of lesser width than this preview here. And so that would help decrease the vertical space, so I can jump to the next section. That'd be really helpful for me. Um, Okay, and then I'm gonna just say whatever I said for that apply to the other stuff. So here, what did you do in the design and why do they want to hire you? If you're gonna be applying to, uh, oh, I don't know. So let's say you're applying to a company that is EA, maybe EA and it's one of their video games. Maybe it's their soccer video game, right? So FIFA. So they're gonna be thinking, can this guy design FIFA? And when they read that paragraph, they need to leave that paragraph saying, "Yeah, I think you could." That's what you need. You need to think about it from the perspective of the employer. And the best way to do that is to look at a job posting and see if they are asking for certain skills, and then go through your work and see if you are addressing those skills in your stuff. Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean there's a lot of really awesome stuff here. So you have a lot of experience, and I think that's awesome. And we just need to find a way to like to show that in a way that they're gonna love that. Okay, so I would say the stuff that is don't use the term concept design. I don't like that term. Um, if it has to be something really general, then say game designer. But something like level designer means a lot more to me. Um, I would say try to include the stuff that you think is most relevant to the kind of job you want to have at the top, or rather the jobs you're applying to at the top. And also whatever you think is the most impressive should be at the top. Some people think, oh, I have to put only my latest work at the top. No, no, you could arrange it in whatever format you want. Uh, whatever is the best way to make it somebody want to hire you, you know? So if your best stuff, your best project maybe of all time you did 2 years ago, and it's like, it's the fourth one down here, put that as the second one. Um, the other thing that is, yeah, that's 100% true. They'll always say that a portfolio is only as strong as its weakest piece. Um, I think all this stuff about being an artist and maybe a video person, I think it might be not relevant. So maybe there's a way for you to say like hobbies or something, and you click that, and it's like, oh, as a hobby, I also do with this other stuff, and I do indie game development. Yeah, I would divorce it. Yeah, yeah, I think something like that would be cool. Okay, awesome. So let's see how this reads on a paper. So you've got so the resume format is very boring. So I think I have some some tutorials on that just from a pure visual standpoint. So your resume looks like the one on the left. Okay? Oh, no worries. Okay, yeah, well I could send you a link. So I think I might have shared this with you a little bit beforehand, but it's helpful just to see it as an example. So do you see that? Could you scroll down to the resume that has the name Scott on it? Right, yeah. So your resume right now it looks a lot like the one on the left, and it's not very striking. So I think you should really consider finding a template to get something that looks like the version on the right, or if you scroll down, you'll see Melissa, same situation. Yours looks like the one on the left, and the one on the right, I mean, the one on the right I think looks really nice. So that makes a big difference, especially for a designer, because actually a lot of designers. So I was helping a student recently who is a designer, and we were talking about his portfolio and his resume. And this might be helpful for you. He said it was really helpful for him. Is just to think about the resume and the portfolio as if you were designing one of your games. So thinking about color, thinking about font and spacing, all those things, all the stuff you've learned there is going to apply here too, and it's particularly relevant for any of these art-minded roles, something like a designer, because they're going to be evaluating your design in everything you send them, including the resume, including the portfolio, and how it looks on the page is relevant. I would say remove the phone number. And honestly, I think, and you don't need the location either. I would say just include your email if you want, and maybe your portfolio. I think that's all that's relevant. Um, we could look at your LinkedIn too. I imagine it's just the resume. I don't use LinkedIn too much, but I know it's also really popular for recruiters to look at, so we could look at this stuff. Okay, great. Okay, cool. Yeah, it actually looks a lot nicer than the resume because it's got like videos and stuff like that. The other thing I notice a lot of students aren't taking advantage of is just, you know, they're going to be reading this resume on the computer. We know that for sure. So there's no excuse to not have links to the stuff you worked on. If you worked on a game, there should be a link to that game so they could check it out. If you have a website that has these games and it has cool visuals and it goes into detail about what you've done, then you should totally have links from your resume to that relevant page on your website. You could use anchors in order, and with anchors in web design, it'll allow the user to automatically scroll down to the relevant section if you're going to use something like a single page design. And so that's incredibly valuable, right? Where it's like, it says something like I came up with level design drafts, and then it has a link under the word drafts, and I click that, and suddenly I'm shown all of your level designs, as photo scanned copies of the different, papers you've written. So that's awesome, right? It really helps to underscore the work, and it adds gravity, I think, to the stuff when it's backed up by that. So I would consider doing that. Okay, so what else do we have here? So we got the education. So you did USC. I mean, great school. One of the things that I've done on the resume, I think this is a nice way to start adding some color, is just to incorporate iconography for stuff that people might recognize. So I'll just pull up my resume for a second here. But what I did was I included the logo for my school. So I just have the little S at the top right there. And with the school, I mean, there is no school better known for game design, I think, than USC. We should totally use that. I think we should put a USC logo on here or something like that. If you want to incorporate color, that's one way to do it. Just an option. So you got the dean's list, right? So that means you got good grades, and you were the game design minor. Okay, yeah, it'd be cool. Okay, yeah, I think that makes sense. Right. Okay. So the 3D animation. Right. Okay. So again, what we want to do is we want to lead with whatever your most relevant stuff is. Right. Yeah. So lead with design. So, um, you know, that should come first. And so when we think about design, I think you want to think about what are designer skills and what is tangible designer skills, because sometimes people will just say like communication. I'm a skilled at communication. Like, what does that really mean? It's a little bit amorphous. What would really help with that is looking into the positions and figuring out what do they want. Um, if you could find some job postings, that'd be really useful, because then you could see, oh, okay, they're looking for somebody who could do Unreal blueprinting. Well, if that's the first thing listed on the skill, then that's going to make them smile. So that's what we want to do there, I would say. And then I think everything that's not directly relevant, it could probably be put somewhere else. Maybe there's a hobby section, and you could throw things like Japanese in there, but I'm not sure it would be directly relevant. And just keep in mind, if it's up here, that means it's more important. I mean, the way that the page is read, it's left to right, top to bottom. So if it comes before, it's more important. Your name comes first, sure. Oh, by the way, game designer up here, right? Tell us who you are and what you do. So this should be Tom Lane, game designer, something like that. Headline with your title, with what you're gonna do. Um, so then we jump in here. So it's saying, you were lead writer. So I'm like, okay, skip. Here it's saying you were beta tester. Okay, skip. Here you're a character designer. Okay, here's where I'm interested. I want to see what you did with design, something like that. And I think I'm being a little bit silly here. They're probably not going to do that, but that's kind of where the back of my mind is thinking, and they might be thinking that as well. Holy shit, you ran a yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's just like if I was designing dialogue for a character in a game, I might need to consider a player who's skimming the information. Are they getting the relevant details? Maybe they're interested in the design word, so I need to make sure I'm hitting that keyword. So I would say, think about if you could reword these, right? I always encourage people not to lie in their resumes, but maybe there's a way that you could recontextualize some of these positions to with a little bit of speechcraft and wordcraft to make it sound like you're being a designer on that game. Maybe there's a role for that. So, for example, you're designing storyboards and you're designing the game narrative. I think that's certainly in line with saying you're a game designer, and that title might actually be a lot nicer as a headline than to say you're a lead writer. And I'd remove the term supervisor, unless people management is its own skill, and it's not what you're looking for right now. So it's not relevant to include. Maybe later on in your career when you're trying to become a design manager, that might be relevant to include that stuff. And I think everybody can appreciate if you have that in the beginning, but it could also be a distraction to some degree. Um, okay, so you were a beta tester for this, received an exclusive tester version of the game, tasked with playing extensively, signed. Okay, one of the biggest things for a resume, I've said this before, but I think it's the number one thing, is you want to include achievements versus tasks, or in other words, responsibilities. So if you had a role and you were able to you created these things, that's an achievement. If you say instead responsible for, implementing dialogue, that is not as good as created dialogue. It actually does have a big difference, and particularly when it says like I was tasked with doing this, it sounds like okay, he did his job. It doesn't sound like you achieved something, and I think we want to always make it sound like you achieved something if possible. The best way to do that is, of course, to have numbers. There's nothing more concrete than saying something like successfully, completed a $15,000 Kickstarter project. That is epic. That's really cool. I feel like that should be the first thing, or something like that. I mean, it's not design, but Um, maybe there's a word, maybe there's a way to say that. Maybe you could say like designed a successful $15,000 Kickstarter campaign. Then they're like, oh, okay, it uses the word design, so now I'm excited. And it sounds a little silly, but I think even that small detail does make a difference. The other thing is you've worked on so many really cool games, and I don't see all of them listed here. So was there a bit of a filtering process to determine what should be on the resume? Okay. Um, so Mihoyo, actually, I didn't recognize the name, but if that's important, then it shouldn't be at the end of the line. It should be like, it should be in the front if possible. It should be, oh, okay, you have it right here. I'm sorry, excuse me. So you have that there. So that's good, actually. I will admit there's something going on here where the spacing between this and the previous thing is equal to the spacing between this and the next line and the paragraphs. And so what it's doing is it looks like it's butter just sort of spread evenly on a page. Where what I really want to see is like chunks where it's like this thing and then this thing. Do you know what I'm saying? Like they're kind of it would be nice if it was similar to the thing on the website, if it was less stratified and more condensed into distinct sections. That way I could sort of read it all. Because I honestly, yeah, I for sure. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And then there is a lot of good templates online. I know I have a link to so something like this. I think it helps a little bit. But where is what is this one? Okay, yeah, so check this one out, freezamaze.com. So this one has, I think, like 100 templates, and you can just grab one off there, and that could be a way to start. And of course, you're a designer, you got a design sense, so you can tweak it from there. But I think one of these as a good place to start might be helpful. So that's definitely a resource you might want to check out. And then the other thing is, always just think about if you need to have something like, for example, education. Of course, they know the University of Southern California is a school, so you don't necessarily need to have that blurb there. Just something to consider. Um, okay, cool. So so the other thing you mentioned, so first of all, for space, I think the new format's going to help with that, and you could also consider, you know, maybe some of the stuff isn't as epic, so maybe you can reduce the word count on that. I'm sure that anything that you're listing here can be done in one line. Especially because I see some stuff that's just a little bit over. So that's relevant. The other thing is I love to share this tip with students is in the digital age, there is no need for you to print out the page. Now, what does that mean? It means we could actually do a lot of cheating with respect to what is even a page. A page is traditionally 8.5 by 11, but visually you can't really tell if a page is 8.5 by 13, let's say. So if you need that extra inch or two or three, you might want to just extend the page, and you could do that in Microsoft Word and export it. I think my resume is longer than 8.5 by 11, and nobody notices. So definitely feel free to bend the rules in some ways. I think one page is a great advice, but I think but there's always a way for you to bend the rules. Yeah, sure. So it's linked as part of the link I sent you, which is Mr. Ventures. Sorry, so it's not included in the thing here. Um, yeah, that's it. That's what I was referring to. Yeah. So I think that'll be good too. Okay, cool. So we talked a little bit about the resume. Oh, so the other thing you mentioned was, oh, okay, like maybe. So let's just read one of these things. Let's kind of go deep. Which do you think is the most impressive here for the job of being a game designer? Yeah, and we'll just talk about that one. Yeah, but it's a beta tester though. That's not like a great honor. Well, that's actually not relevant. The what's important is what's the most impressive. So it's not necessarily the one you're most proud of. In fact, it may be less incredible than some of the other things, but it might sound better. Like for example, you might have been an intern who did nothing at Facebook, but oh my gosh, he worked at Facebook. That can be sometimes more. So I would always think of it from that perspective. It's the hiring manager who doesn't always know, and to some degree they're sort of a victim to whatever it is the story you're going to tell them. So that's just one other thing to consider. Um, I think the other thing is just, making a game on your own, I think is way more impressive than being a beta tester for somebody else's game. So when you're filtering and you're deciding what to include or what not to include, I mean, the thing that got me my first internship was I had made an indie game on my own with one other person, but we had published it. So we went through the whole process of publishing it, and it reached over 1 million downloads. So that was a really impressive line item on my resume, even though it wasn't, strictly a professional. Nobody paid me to do it. Um, and so I think if you are creating games and you're putting them out there, I think that is something you should prioritize as like maybe more impressive than just being a beta tester, even if that's more official in some ways. So right. Well, I think work in progress stuff could be impressive. It depends, right? I mean, there's so many Twitter accounts for games that haven't come out. One that comes to mind is Skate Story or Last Man Sitting, two games that have a huge following but they've never been released. Um, or even yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch, right? And so the idea is like, that could be impressive, but of course, as you probably know, they're always gonna say like, did you ship it? Because that's the hardest thing. So just getting it out there is yeah, it's a big thing. So I think what we could do now, so we got like another half hour. Let me know if there's something specific you want me to address. But I think one thing might be helpful is just to start looking at some positions and figuring out, how they fit with your skill set. So so what I would do is, so I actually, let me see, game dev guide. So, oh, okay? Yeah, could you send me out some links then? Actually, that'd be really helpful. Sure. And I have a guide that I wrote called Hacking Internships, and the URL is tinyurl.com/hackinggamesv2, and that has a section where it's like positions and opportunities I know of, where this is just a whole bunch of different places where you could find engineering posts. So that might be useful for you in case you're looking for positions. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing better than just doing game design internship and seeing what comes up. I mean, of course, if you know companies you want to work for, Amazon, that's a little spooky. Um, that's good, but yeah, I'd say apply everywhere. Yeah, we're really looking for something like ideally you want to be applying to like a big AAA company that's going to take in an intern pool like Zynga or EA or Take-Two, 2K, Activision Blizzard, Riot Games. Um, yeah, any of those would be a really great place to, I think, get the foot in the door. So, and how'd you send it to me? Okay, cool. All right, so I'm gonna close everything else, or maybe I'll keep the resume up. And we could just look at the resume from the perspective of whatever the recruiter is. The other thing is on the hacking games thing, I include a link to resumes from people who are from Carnegie Mellon University. I think that's really important to look at because it's the competition. And you need to know how do you compare against these other student game designers who are applying against you and figure out, if you see somebody who worded something a cool way or they got a cool website or something, how can you know, tune your thing to make that happen? Okay, great. So this position opened up. So I would say um, get whatever you can do in like a week and like start applying to this stuff because you really need to start applying ASAP. There is, expect to hear back from expect to like get an interview if you're lucky from like one in every 100 applications you send. Okay, it's really hard, as particularly for game designers. You may know this, but game design is the hardest internship to get. It's the hardest role to break into. So it is. It's not easy. Okay, so let's see what they say. Gameplay first. The essential foundation of great gaming experiences start with gameplay. Blah blah blah. Respawn. Okay, this is Respawn. Awesome. So those are the Apex Legends guys. So they want a designer and scripter. Okay, so they want a designer and scripter. That's really important. So this is a designer with a technical bent. So immediately they're going to be wondering, can this guy code? Can he script? Okay, you've got that, but it's way down here, right? The C# stuff. So I would include that earlier, and I think you should even use the term game scripting. I don't know if you have it at all here, but it should be in there. What they do also now is they do a lot of resumes that go through um, computers, right? Yeah, they look for keywords. So, you should have the words. You really should do blueprints. Like, give yourself a crash course on blueprints for like a week. Make something simple. And that way you could say, I have experience in blueprinting. You could say, I did it at least once. I played around with it. I'm familiar with the system. Sure. So yeah, so something like that saying that you know how to blueprint specifically for anybody who's using the Unreal Engine, that's going to be relevant, including the names Unreal Engine, Unity Game Engine. I don't know if they're here already, but they should be. Because if you're going to apply to a company that's using Unity, they want to know you've done Unity. If you're applying to a company that does VR, then they definitely want to know that you have Unity experience. So it's all relevant. Okay, so they want a scripter. So that's really important, and it's something for you to consider. Like you might tune your resume a little bit different because scripting is not necessarily just designing. And in fact, I will say, I have heard from my friends and other people in the industry that now they are looking more and more for technical designers, people who have scripting experience. So I would say, it's a fine line, but you might want to say that you are a designer and scripter, or a designer who could script, or technical designer, just because you do want them to not kick you out of that pool potentially. Okay, we're picturing somebody who's creative and technical. Okay. So this happens a lot, right? So they're saying basically if you're a senior, don't apply or something like that, which is annoying, right? So that's why we got the timeline ticking. It's required that you submit a portfolio presentation. Okay, so you need to submit a portfolio. Great. So you got your portfolio set up. I would say try to make it even more beautiful. The best way to do that is look at other portfolios. I think your portfolio. Let me look at it again. Sorry. So your portfolio right now it does not look above average. So I think you should look at other portfolios, see how you compare, and find one that really impresses you, and you say, holy shit, I wish I was that guy, and figure out how you can make yours look more like that. Because here's the thing, it's not lacking content. You have really a lot of games here, and games with pretty dope art. Like this is awesome. It's just not. It's a good story, poorly told. That's kind of the situation. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I just want you to know you got really good stuff here. It's just how you're presenting it. So the best way to do that is looking at the examples. So the guide has a link to the CMU sites, and I would check that out. And let me know if you don't find that. Okay, let's see what else we have here. So this is all nonsense. It's nonsense. What else do we have? Experience working in a game engine. Do you think reading your resume they could say you have experience working in a game engine? Okay, great. So that's a good opportunity then. So it's like, okay, each one of these line items is a question. Does he have experience working in a game engine? Reading your resume, the answer to each one of those questions needs to be a resounding yes. That's how you know you're on the right track. Um, okay. What else? Rapid prototyping. Okay, so I think you have done rapid prototyping. I don't know if you have. I don't know if reading that they would say that you have done it. So maybe that's another thing. The ability to pitch game design concepts. That's sort of different. Um, Strong written and verbal skills. Well, hey, communications major. That might be interesting there. So think about that. Think of it as a question. Does is the answer yes? Other things here. Okay, cool. All right, great. So this looks good. So I think just practicing those steps is going to help you for each one of these things. I'll go through the other ones just because we have time. But maybe we'll take away the same thing. I'm not sure. The other thing is think The other thing is thinking about your network. So you go to one of the best game design schools in the world. There's no question about that. There's an amazing wealth of resources there. I'm not sure if you're involved in the games program, right? What is it called? AGP or something like this? Um, right. So what's the plan if you don't get an internship? Are you can you afford to do a master's in game design or something like that? Okay, that might be a viable backup plan. And it would give. I mean, I remember I was at GDC. We were at this chat, and there was other people there, and they were saying, hey, we're all actually going to do the masters because we didn't get an internship yet, so we're with the masters will give us an extra year. And I would also suggest to people, there are internships that happen off season, and I've certainly done a lot of those. So maybe you could do an internship in the winter, and depending on how your school is set up, you might be able to take a quarter off or a semester off or something like that and do the internship. But I think getting that work experience is maybe in some ways going to be more valuable than just going to class. And if you delay a few months later, you know, it may be for the better. And of course everybody's situation is different, but it's just something to consider. If you have the ability to do that, you might want to. Um, Okay, yeah. So I see the same thing here, but there's obviously some differences because it's a narrative designer, so they're talking about that. So when I'm thinking about narrative design, I'm thinking about the tools that are used for creating narrative design, particularly branching dialogue, which can be very difficult for traditional writers to take on. If that's something you have experience in, you should totally talk about that. There's a lot of tool sets which are specific around that. So for example, um, Twinery, or Inkle. So you use Twine. That's great. So that should be here. Um, that should totally be here, right? Any of those or any of those like specific technologies that should certainly come before, some of this other stuff. And yeah, and there may be a way for you to, because they're gonna want to know that for sure. If you have experience writing divergent choice-based dialogue, that's a very fine skill set. So that's like good XP for this kind of game. I don't know if that's relevant for Star Wars, probably less so, but just something to think about. Yeah, as always, it depends on the game you're working on. Interactive storytelling. I mean, here's the thing for a narrative designer, and here's the other thing I'll say. There's no reason you can't before you send off the resume. So it's gonna say Tom Ling, game designer, or something like that. Before you send it off to EA, delete game, replace it with narrative. So it says Tom Ling, narrative designer. Then they say, oh shit, this is exactly who we're looking for. So uh, gotcha. Yeah, I would say just put one on the website, but if you're applying, doing a little tuning here and there might help. It may. You never know. But so I wanted to say the network thing. I didn't finish that. So USC, amazing network. Um, is there any way you could leverage that? Can you join a club or like join the alumni network and meet with somebody who could maybe help you get an internship or even just do an informational interview? Informational interviews are really nice. You could get something out of that. Um, That's great. That's great. I would say try to put your resume and your portfolio through the gauntlet, you know. To take my feedback with a grain of salt, implement the changes you think are worthwhile, and then go to the next person and see what they say, you know. Okay, I think that's great. I think you need to be sensitive on time though. You really don't have a lot. So if you're waiting, I can empathize with that because I've been in that exact situation. But you know, as you know, the positions will fill. Also, I don't know if you're applying to this one, associate game designer temp contract, totally up your alley. You know, this is a great fit for you. You know, looking at contract positions at an associate level, that is as close to an internship as you're going to get at some companies. So that's a perfect fit. And so you should definitely be looking at associate level positions under contract or stuff like that. It's a great opportunity. Okay, cool. So what else do we have? So you're also looking at product management, obviously very different. But hey, any way to get the foot in the door, you know, I can understand that. Be mindful the hiring managers see all the positions you apply to, especially at the same company, right? So they're gonna see if you apply to like so many different things, and that might convey like, oh, he's indecisive. At least one recruiter who I actually did get hired, he expressed that to me. He's like, yeah, I saw you applied for these three positions. You know, we didn't even know which one you were really passionate about. So I think that might be just something to consider. Okay, cool. So this is a game design intern for Words Casual. You already okay? So we didn't even talk about the interview process. We should save the last 10 minutes to talk about that a little bit. But prior to okay, so let's see what do they want here. So I think Words with Friends is like the last game holdout in Zynga that's not Unity. Everything else is Unity, and Words with Friends is Coco's 2D. So if you have Coco's 2D experience, which is like a weird thing that nobody uses, I think. Maybe it's used still, I don't know. But that might stand out, you know. And hey, maybe you do it for a week, like I said, and then you just put it on there, and then it stands out. Or maybe you put it on. I don't. I mean, you shouldn't lie, but you know, there's a lot of options. And understanding and love for yes, this is all a little bit of you know blah blah blah. I don't think I'm getting a lot of stuff out of here. Nah, not that much. So this is not helpful. You know, this is not really helpful. But other times it is. You know, sometimes they talk about stuff that's very specific. So for example, product management. You know, it might be useful to say you have Jira experience. If you do, if you don't, that's easy to do a little crash course on stuff like that. Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit about the interview. Um, okay, so uh, have well, I would say try your best to prepare for a game design interview and in what extent you can. There's certainly a bunch of questions you're going to expect. They're going to ask you what games do you play. They're going to ask you, and you should, if you're going into an interview. So this is assuming you get one, right? And of course, it's going to be hard to get there, but once you do, and you will eventually, um, they're going to ask you, you know, I'll just stop sharing my screen. So they're going to ask you what kind of games you play. They're going to ask you what do you think about those games. They're going to say, okay, what's your favorite game, you know? And they're going to say, what would you change about that game to make it better? And they really want to hone in and figure out if you think like a designer, particularly if you've thought deeply about their games. So Respawn Entertainment certainly wants you to have a lot of strong opinions about Apex Legends. Um, Words with Friends team. They want you to have certainly played that game quite a few times and to have opinions on how it could be better or, you know, frustration points and stuff like that. And there's good takes and there's bad takes. And I think if you're going to be interviewing with these people, um, maybe even an informational interview might be useful to say something like, hey, you know, like, is this a good take or like, what do you think about this design idea? And hear their response to that. What do they think about that idea? And start thinking about things from the perspective of a designer. So, for example, if you have an informational interview with the Words with Friends designer, you might say something like, oh, you know, when I was playing Words with Friends, I noticed that um, I'm going to make something completely up, right? But I say, I noticed that I can't play with more than three people at once. And then the designer might say something, you would think that playing with more than 3 people at once is a good idea. But what we realized is having 4 or more players on the board led to a power imbalance. And because of this power imbalance, there wasn't enough resources to spread to each of the players, given our standard board size. So he might say something like that. Write it down. Then you get the interview, and they say, "Oh, well, what do you think about Words with Friends?" And you say, "Well, I thought about uh, one of the main things I've heard from players, just reading through forums and watching reviews, is they really wish they could play with more friends at once. Maybe want to play with 4 people or something like that. And I thought about that, and I realized, it could actually lead to a power imbalance where there's not enough resources to spread between the players. But one of the ways that you could accommodate that is perhaps extending the board size. So you're sort of taking a professional designer's opinions and saying them twice, but you're learning in that process. It's not just regurgitation. You're also learning, and that may inform your next thing. And then they'll say, okay, well, the board size, it goes like this, and they ask you, well, what would you do about this? And then you're like, okay, now you've got to think about it, and then you come up with something, right? But it's like it's all going to build off of that. So you want to start thinking like a designer and figuring out how designers think and what do they think about. And the day-to-day of a Words with Friends designer or an Apex Legends designer, what does that look like? What are they doing from 9 to 5? Um, are they working with a proprietary tool? Maybe they're working with a tool that's freely accessible online. It's pretty common, and you could have access to it too. And it's like, oh wow, you do this all day. You use Excel and you do regression plots. Well, hey, you know what? I can do that, and I can format my resume so that it shows that I could do that. So then they think, okay, is he skilled? And they could say yes, right? And they could say, is he skilled in the exact things we need him to do? And it's like, oh my God, yes, he's done the exact things we want. He's not just a designer; he's a narrative designer. He's worked not only with games with words, but he's worked with this exact thing. So that's another thing to think about. Okay, so that's all I've got. What other questions do you have? Um, so the answer of starting it from scratch, building it from scratch, like building your own website, absolutely not. No way. Definitely using something like Weebly or Wix. Weebly is the go-to. My website is Weebly. That may not be apparent, but it's totally Weebly. Um, you can make a dope website through Weebly. You I I think there's no difference with respect to design. It's just if they show an ad at the bottom. But I think I do have the premium version to remove the ad. Um, but there are ways to hack it too. You could hack the source code to remove the ad if you Google that. There's a way to do that. Um, but yeah, Weebly's great. Weebly's all you need. And to spend time learning how to be a web designer, you're not a web designer. Waste of time. Total waste of time. Just focus on showing your work. And I think so. Did you find the CMU page? I think so. The resume template's a great way for us to address the resume design. And let me see. So I would highly recommend the Hacking Games thing. That's tinyurl.com/hackinggamesv2. I sent you that. The other stuff resources I have are mostly for engineers, so it's probably not as relevant. But let me see. I have something here about CMU, or maybe it's spelled Carnegie. Yeah. Okay. The Carnegie Mellon ones are great. Okay, I got the link here. And it is etc.cmu.edu/learn/students, and I pasted it in the chat. Okay, so look, some of these students are going to have websites that suck, right? Some are going to be worse than yours. That's not who we're worried about. We need to worry about who's going to get the position, right? So you need to look at people who are better than you. So this lady's 3D art might be relevant. Oh, okay. Can we search by designer? Yeah, you can. So you can see who's a. So this guy's a programmer and designer, right? Sounds like you. So his name's Sam Hugh. So we can click on his personal website and see if it's good. You know, it might suck. So, oh, sorry, I'm not sharing my screen. Let me show you what I'm looking at. We can just look at it together. I've got 3 minutes. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So we go to Sam Who's website. Oh man, his website looks way better than yours. Look at that. He's got that 3x3 thing, and if you hover over it, it yeah. This is way better. 10 times, you know. Does he need projects here? Probably not. But that's not to say it's perfect. It's probably not perfect, but it looks damn good. So we go here and we look at his information about the thing. Wow, look at how beautifully this is designed too, right? The use of color here as well. So first he explains the project, talks about the platform, says his designer is first, says his role, sorry. Talks about specifically what he did, gives credit to the other people on his team, uses some of the iconography to sort of like brand recognition, make people feel good. It sounds like he has embedded videos here, but I think they're not loading. I think that's what's missing in this blank space. Yeah, something like that. He's even got pictures of his design process and some of the documents he worked on. I mean, this is epic. You know, if you could do something like this, that'd be incredible. I think Sam's website is 10 out of 10, or certainly 8 out of 10. I think, yeah, you know, why not just copy his format? You know what I'm saying? There's nothing copyrighted about it, and you're gonna find you iterate on it, you design it, you do it differently. You know, he's got a little blog, he's got a nice resume too. And then he puts all his random stuff maybe over here in the about section. I guess I'm not sure. But that guy stands out. Okay, he's gonna get the job. If you and him apply to the job, he's gonna get it. Okay, he will defeat you in a 1v1. So we need to win. So you need to look at all these people and you need to work on your stuff until you are beating people. And if you have difficulty, you know, being critical about, you know, whether or not you'll win in a 1v1, then that's a great place to get a third perspective and ask some of the other people you'll be interviewing with, you know, hey, how does mine compare to this? What do you think about that? But I know people always say, right, don't compare yourself to other people. That's exactly what you need to do here, because that's what's going to happen. So, hey, man, you're on the right track. You've got some great projects, and I think we've talked about a whole bunch of ways that you could go forward and like really show them the gems that they are. So, yeah, I think I'll just leave you with good luck, and let me know how it goes, and if you need any help in the future, okay? You got it, Thomas. All right, I'll catch you later. Bye. Okay, so that finishes our chat with Thomas. We're going to be talking with another student now. Let's see. His name is Nick. Okay, we got a Zoom call here. And let me pause this. I'll just get his permission before I record. Okay, great. Awesome. Okay, yeah, I've actually got it in OBS, so hopefully that works. Yeah, I was just helping the other student, and now I'm excited to look at your stuff and hear all about you. So let's start from the beginning. Your name is Nicholas. Do you prefer Nick or Nicholas? Okay, great. Okay, Nick, and you study at what university? What's your degree? What's your year? Okay. Sure, right on. So what roles get you excited in game development? And who, sorry, what's the developer? Does that mean like a coder or something? Okay, got it. Sure. No, that's fine. Yeah, I guess the parlance of game developer is sort of a catch-all for anyone who works on a game. Where someone who's like a maybe a coder, you would say maybe like an engineer or a scripter or something like that. So I see what you're saying there. So you got the designer, product management, and engineering. Okay, right on. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I think those are two sort of distinct possibilities. So the community building might be something like a community manager or a company spokesperson who might be talking to the players, and then the other side of that coin might be a producer, which is somebody who's sort of working on the schedule and helping the game get made. So those are sort of two that you're thinking about, right?
Using certain items in the game, certain people logging on at certain times from certain communities, right? Sentiment analysis of Twitter and so forth. And you have to merge that with a lot of knowledge behind the game and behind a lot of those more technical elements to continue to deliver on that promise that you're giving to that community, right? I guess that's more of how I had previously imagined it, not having any understanding of the games industry, right? And this is exactly what I'm here to check with you. I guess does that mesh with what you have seen on inside baseball kind of view, or is that something where perhaps I'm conflating two things that are a little bit more separate roles in the community manager and the product manager, kind of as you had said?
Sure. Maybe I misheard you, but if let me say it back, and you could tell me if I got it wrong. But you're saying like you envision a role where you go into the community, you sort of hear what they're saying about the game, you take that feedback and crystallize it into action items, and then you bring it to the team and you say, hey, this is what we could do to make the game better.
Um, Sure, and part of it is an ideator, right? Part of it is that process of saying, "Hey, here's what we've heard from the community." Sure. Part of it is also saying, "Hey, we know from a business standpoint, we need to drive more engagement with this game because we're trying to use this game, or drive more cross engagement with this other DLC that we're driving, right? Because we're having to justify a certain business objective." And working together in that tripod with you know a, a more systems development lead and a more artistic production development lead to say, hey, here's what we're thinking from a marketing and business financials perspective, right? How can we make this happen in terms of the game, right? And really blending that business and community sentiment into the art and the science of building a game.
Okay. Um, Yeah, that does make sense to me. I think there's definitely a
Okay.
lot of positions that do that. I think it's going to be a very different at different companies though. So
Yeah.
every company's going to have like a different thing, and I think it's actually not like standardized in this industry. Like what a producer means something very different at one company versus the other. You know, it's like it's totally random in some ways. What kind of company would you want to work for? Is there a particular one you had in mind, or like a size or a kind of game?
Yeah. Well, and at this point, Matthew, like I am very open, right?
Sure,
At this point, I am still in the exploratory phase. So I'm still definitely trying to reach out to a lot of people. I said at the beginning of this interview, I'm not necessarily interested in game development first. That's not where kind of my core skill set lies, but I'm really excited to talk to you and get your kind of understanding of what the game industry is, what your experiences have been. I think that would be really valuable. So I don't necessarily have an answer for that question
sure,
about
that's
what
okay.
I would imagine. Um, in terms of logistically, it's a lot easier for a company like a Riot Games and EA to accept an MBA intern rather than, if I was a developer perhaps at this stage and I was looking to pivot, maybe I could form a couple of indie games and try to get hired onto a development team on a smaller company, right? Smaller companies don't usually have a whole lot of, use for MBAs who are doing the kind of like financial planning strategy. A lot of that stuff is kind of crunched down into one or a half a person's job,
Right.
as far as I understand.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I'm also thinking along that line for you. So we're looking at a bigger company like EA or Riot, and it does sound like you're really passionate about the decision making, about what goes into the game, and sort of taking that external feedback and using it more so than collecting it. It sounds like you really like working with uh, those people who are of the different disciplines and trying to collaboratively solve problems. So I think probably the passion might be a little bit more on that production side of somebody who's sort of more internal or in-house. And I think maybe a role for that could be producer. That could be a
Hmm.
potential role. And there's certainly opportunities to get into producer at like the ground level. And you could rise up pretty quickly, or maybe there's an maybe it's possible that you might even, depending on your past experience at the consultancy, be able to come in as like a mid-level person. I'm not sure, but I think if we targeted a little bit lower and we sort of aimed, expected to get higher, I think that might be good. So something like figuring out, what would it be like to get a producer role on like a company like Riot or EA or Blizzard, Activision, something like that. I think that could be pretty epic. Or epic for Fortnite. That could be cool too. Yeah. The other thing that I think, one of the things you spoke to me about was this idea of the community and them giving you feedback that you might incorporate into the game. That sounds a lot like a live service game, which is a very different kind of game than a game that only releases maybe once every 4 years, like God of War. So if you're really passionate about the community and sort of getting their feedback and seeing how the game moves on sort of a month by month progression, or maybe something a little bit different than that, but like on that time scale, I think something that's called a live service game might be the best fit for that passion. So we're talking about games like League of Legends, Fortnite, Call of Duty
COD.
Warzone,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Those
Apex
those meat and
Legends.
potato games that come out every year.
Yeah, yes,
Not every year. Not every,
but
but
it's the
come out
live service
regularly.
aspect. So for example, Call of
Hmm.
Duty, um, Cold War will release like every year, or God
Hmm.
of War, or what's another game that like FIFA will release every year, but it's not a
Hmm.
live service game, or
Hmm.
it's not like it's
It
different.
hasn't, but I understand what
Yeah,
you're
like I
saying.
mean like
There's
a
a
free
live
to play
service portion
game.
where you're interacting and reacting to the community and building with the community versus hey, here's FIFA 19, here are the stats. We're not necessarily going to tweak them that much. The game is kind of set until we release FIFA 20.
Yeah, so I think that might be something that might make you more excited. So okay, so that's cool. So I'd love to answer more questions if you have specific stuff. Otherwise,
I
we could
do.
just start looking at your resume, your portfolio. We could also look at job applications if you've already earmarked a few. That would be helpful. But in other words, we could just jump on a Google and start looking at stuff. Just trying to figure out uh, how you might fit into an existing picture and figuring out what are they looking for and to what degree are you that person?
Hmm. That's a good question. Well, and again, thank you for that. I think I came into this chat more expecting kind of just a general exploratory session. I wouldn't have scheduled it this late if I hadn't. And
Sure,
we could definitely have a follow up to discuss some of those things as well. But I think
sure.
for now, I certainly have questions if you're willing to answer them because I'm really interested in your experience. I'm really interested in kind of the way that you have seen, the way that you have come up through the gaming industry, seeing, and we'll go I sent across a couple of questions, but specifically, we've been talking about kind of that difference between large company, small company. I
Sure.
have a couple of assumptions just from reading about the industry and just from hearing stories about, projects like, like for example, the full backstory behind, and why can I see the cover, but I can't think of it. No Man's Sky, specifically like that whole saga. I'm interested in more of kind of like where you are in terms of your, and I'm mixing the second and third question a little bit here, but your experience with both large and small companies and where that leaves you today after having both of those experience, kind of like where your passions lie and how you're using that experience to take your next steps in your career.
Well, I think for me, I was a little bit unique in that I did a lot of internships beforehand. I mean, most people have done
Mm-hmm.
one or two, but I actually had the privilege of doing 14 before I had my first full-time job. And that helped me a lot because I could figure out what was the best fit for me. And I didn't know on the first job, and I think if I had decided after my first internship, I probably wouldn't have, I wouldn't be as happy as I am today because I really love the job I'm in. I've never been in a job where I've felt more fulfilled than my current job, and I think
That's
that's
great.
that's a huge factor that has been the opportunity to try different stuff. I think it's been really helpful because, as I said before, like so many things, even within the games industry, are different. So I started working in healthcare. So, well, actually, I did some work for NASA, and then I worked for
Mm-hmm.
the International Pharmaceutical Federation. So I built a
Mm-hmm.
program for them, and that kind of got me really into programming, particularly. And then I built an indie game on my own. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
you've heard the story of like a lot of people who are trying to get an internship will maybe make a game on their own or something like that. And so I did just that, and it did very well, which helped me to get my first position, which is at Zynga, where I met with Jim, and he gave me some advice as well. And so then from there, I did a whole slew of other internships, trying out different positions, different. So I did different positions. I thought maybe I want to be a designer, maybe I want to be a programmer. I tried out one of each. I tried different kinds of programmers. I tried being a tools programmer. I tried being a
Mm-hmm.
gameplay engineer. All very different, um, and they feel different too. And so I did a little bit of this. I did a little bit of that. I figured out, okay, I tried different game teams. I tried working on a team um, like God of War, which is released once every like 5 years, one of those games, or 4 years, or 3 years, whatever. And I felt what that was like. And then I worked on a game like Fortnite, which is really, it's always out. It's a live service game, like we were talking about. I felt what that was like as well. And I figured out, well, I think coming into it, I had this assumption that my favorite games to play would be the same my favorite games to work on. But I realized that that wasn't the case, and that I actually really enjoyed working on games that weren't my favorites to play. So my favorite games to play are really small, bespoke, personal, indie game narrative-based experiences. Something like Gone Home, or
Mm-hmm.
really anything from Steve Gaynor,
Grizz to
or
away.
yeah,
Yeah.
like those kind of games. But I realized
Mm.
I like working on big teams though, and those games are made by like 4 people,
Mm-hmm.
5 people. But I love working on
Yeah.
teams of like 200 people. And I like working with some of the best people in the world. So I like working with really top talent on some of these larger teams that could afford to hire somebody who's just a lighter, right? Like the idea of somebody who just does lights that doesn't exist in an indie game. And that's really cool
Exactly.
that you could work with a specialist who's skilled in that one area. So I love that. And I learned about that a little bit. I learned about the different kind of release cycles. So I realized I think I like working on a live game a lot more than like a staged, like a game that only releases once a year or something like that. I really do prefer that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I like to see the product of my work, and you can't see the product of your work if it comes out, in 2 Christmases. So I
Right.
prefer that, and a bunch of other things. And then I realized I was a gameplay engineer, or at least that's what I wanted to do, which is it's a certain confluence of technology and design skill and communication skill, and it's a good fit for me. But it's different at different companies, so that's something to consider as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my path. What else you want to know?
Um, so that's great. You've had 14 internships. You've gotten to kind of tweak. You've gotten to test, hypothesis test a lot, right? Hey, I think that I'm going to like working on these bespoke games. Oh, wait, no, I actually really liked working with that top talent. I liked being a small part, a specialist inside of a large team and being able to create something really cool on a short calendar. Um, what's your next one that you're testing? Right? What is the next kind of thing that you're like, hey, this is the next thing that I want to try. This is the next thing that I want to do within the next 1 to 3 years, right? As you continue on that career path.
Well, I think I already know I'm really passionate about working with people and working on big teams. So at
Mm-hmm.
some point, I think I want to transition from being an independent contributor to somebody who's leading teams on a larger scale. Um, and I think right now my focus is just on gaining skill set to do that efficiently and effectively. I think it's going to take some time watching how teams are led, and I've done that a lot, and I've learned a lot of ways that teams are led that I don't like, and I think that's one of the great opportunities of
Mm.
having a diverse array of experiences. But I've seen some stuff I don't like. I've seen some stuff I like, and I've had some good managers and I've had some bad managers, and I think that's probably what my path looks like in the next 5 years is like working towards being a mid-level engineer who's competent, and then working towards being somebody who can help lead others. And I mean, that's a pretty well-defined track. It usually starts out as, you start working on bugs to fix something, and then you own that feature. And then maybe you own the direction of that feature. And then maybe you start doing that, you work on that you work on that part of the project, and then that part of the project is bigger than one person, so you manage somebody to work on that part of the project, or you help the new intern get up to speed, and that you experience mentorship and management a little bit in that, and then that feeds into what it's like to work on like to help other junior people. So it's just kind of like a pretty well told story, and so I plan to just sort of read it out. I don't foresee any big changes. I think the only thing in the back of my mind is that I'm working at a pretty small team right now, and so I don't know if that necessarily affords the latitude for like um, new managers, So if I see it's a situation in like 3 or 5 years where it's like, okay, like I mean, everybody's really happy on the team, and like if I feel like I can't grow and with respect to that discipline, maybe that's an opportunity for me to look at it, another opportunity to find a place where I can grow in those people management skills and sort of that new muscle and where I could practice that.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe there's an opportunity to do that on the existing team. I'm not sure, but it's probably not a question I need to worry about right now.
You can't have none of us have a crystal ball, right? None of us can
Yeah,
predict the future. So
very true.
it's good to have the compass, right? But you don't really know what's beyond the next kind of set of trees. So it's good that you have that kind of guiding vision. It's good that you have that knowledge of yourself. I have a very similar knowledge, right? I'm somebody who knows that I want that technical piece to my job, right? But I'm also a good communicator. That falls a little bit more into bridging the business people with the development people with, you know, previously it was the healthcare people, but seeing if it could be the game design people. And I think it sounds like you have a lot of that same skill set too, where you're able to translate between multiple populations and stuff like that too, which at a bigger company typically goes very, very well as well. Um, I am interested in that though too. As you've been on these bigger teams, as you've been at Zynga and a couple of these bigger areas where you have one lighting person, right? You have a lot of these great specialists. Have you found that there's elements of dissonance between those groups, or where do you often find kind of some of that friction, whether it's project timelines, priorities, coming into play? I would imagine, and again, I'll go ahead and vamp a little bit just to give you some time, and so you can say, no, Nick, that's not right. You're being too mean to the games industry. Um, I would imagine that there's always, so a little bit of grift between the business side and the art side, right? Between the hey, this is what we really would imagine this game to be. This is what it could be. This is a really cool new feature that we're working on. From the hey, here's financially where we need this game to be. Here's how many users we need to meet quota to be able to, if you're a public company like EA, meet shareholder expectations. Um, is there that kind of friction that you've experienced, or how does that play out?
Yeah, so I would say that, yeah, people always fight. Like there's always some sort of drama
True.
between groups. It's very rarely though like From I mean, hey, it's different on every team, right? But like from what I've seen, it's very rarely production versus like content creation, because like
Hmm.
production's like production's very often going to lose that argument, and it's almost always like the artists are going to have like, or the content creators, whether it's usually design, is going to have final say in that. So like, um, I also have a sort of a triad of disciplines, but mine has design, art, and engineering, because production is
Mm-hmm.
sort of auxiliary to each one of those. But I don't think it's really a category in itself. But there's something to be said though about like these different teams, and they're often competing for different reasons. So for example, I mean it's going to depend on every company though, right? So like for example, Amazon right now, like Amazon's been a company that really hasn't been their game teams have not been led like from that design or artistic standpoint. They've had a much stronger. I mean, if you look at their VP setup right now, they have a strong roster of people. Like Amazon does this thing where they hire a lot internally. Like the whole
Mm-hmm.
Amazon ethos is like, if you can manage a duck, you can manage a cow. So it's like, if you can so I don't know who they tapped to lead the games, but I think it was like, I don't know, it might have been like the guy who leads like Alexa or something like that. And so like, if they clearly have priorities of like maybe focusing closer to that like production standpoint. And I just
Mm-hmm.
don't think it's working for them. And I think they're seeing that, and they're gonna pivot or die, and they've died like 3 times now. So like I think they're gonna get the picture at some point. But I think at the end of the day, it usually comes down to like the designers versus the engineers or something like that. There's like a situation there, but it's very rarely production might say like, oh, we need this deadline early or something like that. But like pretty much, like they're never going to say that like against the will of people. Like if production says we need to sell this by Christmas, it's like everybody knows we need to sell that by Christmas. It's not like a real opinion, you know whereas I think
Yeah.
the opinions are what going to get people like engineering and art fighting. Or even something like so then there's other things that can happen at like a larger standpoint. So for example, a company like Zynga is known for having like these different fiefdoms, where they have
Mm-hmm.
different games that are competing for a shared pool of collective resources. And so you can have the game managers, GMs, is like the king
Mm-hmm.
in that
Yeah.
ecosystem, and they're vying for like money. It's always money, right? And so they're like trying to compete, or even people, talent's also a thing. So they're like trying to fight each other for like dominance inside the Zynga ecosystem, and like that can be toxic. So I think that's like another way that I've seen that story play out. But yeah, I mean the classic example is the artist wants more detail, and the engineer wants it to be more optimized. That's usually where like the conflict arises. I think it's less so on the production versus the world kind of thing.
Okay. No, and I think that that's yeah. Production. Maybe I gave a couple of bad examples. I think you're right. I don't think if people are saying, "Hey, here's the deadline," there's not. I mean, like in crunch time, there might be some negotiations about deadline, but
Uh,
typically that's less movable than some of the other midterm battles, right? Like you're saying about.
maybe
Sorry, you opened your mouth there. Okay.
no, I think, I mean, like that's it seems to be what happened to Cyberpunk just recently with City Red.
Yeah.
It sounded like they had an immutable deadline, and like they just had to get it out there. And like, I mean, that game was in production for like 6 years or something insane. Like maybe there's truth to like it just needed to get shipped, or something needed to get shipped. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there was dissent.
Yeah, and you always have those decisions, right? How much do we risk our brand if we push versus if we set, right? It is in one of those decisions that kind of has to be made by everybody involved, right? At least at the top. And in that sense, there's always going to be derision based off of, hey, I really think this needs to go out because everybody's name's on it. So um, that makes sense. I'm also interested. I've heard that people who are working in this industry generally are passionate about games. Imagine that. But more so than an industry, I would say like finance, right? You definitely have people who are interested in, optimizing portfolios in finance, but game typically draw people who are hobbyists in the game industry as well. Um, does that supercharge discussions both for good or for bad as well. I think that as I've come across people in healthcare similarly charged, right, you can get people very, very interested in patient safety, which oftentimes can lead to a lot of urgency around, initiatives to improve operations and reduce errors and such. But it also can lead to that emotion going, against each other if not everybody's pulling in the same direction.
Yeah, I mean it's a factor of how close you are to the product. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
CEO maybe isn't like a pro gamer always, right? But in some companies, right? In other companies, that's totally the case. But in the production standpoint, oh yeah, 100%. Like the closer you are to the game, I think they're gonna want that. Like obviously a designer, like they're gonna have no tolerance for a designer who doesn't play the game they're trying to design. I think an engineer, it depends on the kind of engineer because there's a lot of different kinds. An
Mm-hmm.
artist, it depends, but usually it's going to be more like a designer where it's like, yeah, they definitely need to have experience in it. With producers, I think it's probably the case that you need to be very familiar with mechanics and other stuff in the genre. And it's usually not gaming in general. It's not like, are you a gamer or not? It's more like, do you know the space well? So, for example,
Mm-hmm.
if you're playing like Apex Legends, you need to know first person shooters well, and you need to know battle royales even better because that's a really hot ecosystem right now, and there's a lot going on
Those are
there.
your competitors. Those
Yeah,
are the people that you're trying. If I'm saying, hey, I'm interested in first person battle royales, right? Am I going to choose Fortnite? Am I going to choose PUBG? Am I just going to choose COD, or am I going to choose Apex?
yeah,
Right? And you got to know where you fall and where your benefits are. Absolutely.
yeah. So I'm not sure whether or not I'm not sure what it means to supercharge a discussion. Maybe you could define that because that may occur. I'm not sure.
Sure. Sure. So one of the things that I've observed while talking to, for example, physicians about, scheduling training up for a new system, and as such, we would need to be pulling physicians and kind of reducing their load. Um, was that often these conversations get back to patient safety, right? Which is good. That's exactly where you want these conversations to go. You want your physicians thinking about patient safety. You want your trainers thinking about patient safety. You want your IT people thinking about patient safety. Um, but often people have different ideas of what that means, right? So, for example, for a trainer's perspective, patient safety might mean, look, we really need these physicians trained, right? We really need you to get good on this system so that you can enter everything accurately, so that we're sending the message to the next room, the next part of the process, to the billing, to wherever it might be, accurately and efficiently, right? So we're freeing you up. But to the physician, that might be, you're taking me out for 2 weeks for training. Not only am I going to, that financially is a hit for me, but like also we need to have as many physicians as we can for safety reasons and, in case the ICU fills, right? We are putting our patients at risk by taking people out to do training, right? So it's a cost balance, and you want there to be dissonance there, right? That's productive, right? Where it can get less productive is where people stop talking about the logistics, stop seeing each other's side, and start saying you're putting patient safety at risk. No, you're putting patient safety at risk, right? And so that's kind of what I mean by that supercharging negative side of the discussion, is when people start to go back into, this is something I fiercely care about, right? And I am willing to posterize you in a certain way or frame you in a certain way as against my core beliefs, right? So I'd be interested to see, because I've had many a great productive debate with my gaming friends about, different mechanics or, different ways the game was implemented. But I could see in a work setting that if you are very passionate about this character acting this certain way, or this new upgrade that you're acting, and this new system that you're introducing to FIFA, you know, and somebody says, "Hey, look, we have to scrap that because we're really mandated to go and increase, user numbers. So we're going to have to actually add this like glitzy thing that really is not going to appeal to the core player base, but really is going to get more people in the door." Right? I could see that being a tough discussion, because that's starting to be the business taking something away that's part of your core belief.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at is sort of when those conflicts break down, how are the decisions resolved? And I think there's a lot of ways that I've seen, and I think every team is going to do that a little bit differently. But I mean, like the relative power of like these different disciplines, and it does often break down across disciplinary lines, is usually
Mm-hmm.
something like like a big part of the core of the history of the studio. So for
Hmm.
example, um, so some studios, like, everybody can give a feedback and that's welcomed, right? There's other studios where it's really just one person who makes the decision and you can talk to that person, but it's their vision. And then there's other studios where I think really anybody can kind of bring something up, but it's a group decision of whether or not it comes forward. So everything has a different decision there. But I think another factor is just like I was saying, the history of the studio. So for example, a studio like Epic Games, which is like very, very engineering focused, the
Hmm.
engineers will have a very strong power in deciding how a decision is going to go, more so than other constituents, which would be design and art, versus a studio like Naughty Dog, which is going to be very focused on the art and design direction, and engineering is not, I think, the first seat at the table there. Certainly for a game like God of War, I don't think that was the case, right? I mean, God of War is probably a good example. If you watch that documentary with Cory Barlog
Hmm.
and Raising Kratos is what it's called. You know, the guy, the director, he talks about how his art director like left in the middle of the project. You know,
Yeah.
people don't leave art directors leaving in the middle of the project. Like that's not going to happen unless somebody's really pissed off. So it's very
Right.
clear that like there was a there was a showdown that happened in that studio and somebody got shot, you know? So I think it's like, you know, how is that going to shake? That's a very design oriented studio. Like there's, you know, maybe the art was a factor, but I think now it's very clear like that studio is going to do what design wants to do. Um, and I think
Clear who
it,
drives the bus.
yeah, so I think that's going to be a big factor is just like the the character of the studio is going to decide like how those arguments pan out like most of the time.
That's really wise, and I've seen that at other organizations, so it totally makes sense. It totally makes sense, and it totally makes sense because that's something of a culture. Once you join a team, right? You have to really quick. That's part of the drinking from the fire hose, right? That's part of the. All right, who's really the tail that wags the dog here, right? It might not necessarily be finance. Finance might really have to say, all right, we're going to take a loss on this because this is the way that we're going to really design this new game, or vice versa, right? Just like you said. So I think that that's a really good insight. And I really appreciate you talking to me and even talking to me a little bit over. I think that it's really cool,
Sure.
not only that you did this, but that you're recording this for the next one that comes along, and
Yeah,
making sure
of
to pass the
course.
torch. So
Yeah, I've made a lot
um,
of resources on Breaking In. I think I sent you some links, so
you did. I
yeah, feel
appreciate
free to
that.
read through that. I hope it helps you.
And no, Matthew, I really appreciate it. And if I can help at all, too, I am now in your network. So if you need somebody to talk about the business side of things, or start looking into kind of community engagement, starting a club, anything like that, even just considering an MBA, maybe they're trying to get out of gaming, right? More than happy to talk to them. A friend of Jim is a friend of mine, and I now consider you a friend. So more than happy to talk to anybody you throw my way as well.
Yeah, right on. And so you're in your first year now, or your second year?
Yep, first year of grad school. So I got one more year, and then I am out.
So
So
that's like 18
uh,
months.
it is yeah, 18 months, 24 months. It's
Okay.
a 2-year program. There are definitely it's about every flavor under the sun you can do. Kellogg specifically, which is where I went to undergrad, has a one year program that's pretty good. But typically the MBA is for career switchers. Typically it's used for people who want to do something that's different than what they were doing before.
Right on.
Um, so I would say for anybody who's interested, if you're interested in climbing the ladder and you need an MBA because it's a very conservative corporate culture, um, 1 year MBAs are perfect, right? If you know you're going right back, you don't need an internship, you don't need to try anything out. Go get it and get out. Um, Otherwise, having a year to try to figure it out, having a year to try to say maybe I'm interested in gaming, even though I've only done healthcare.
Yeah.
Um, it's a good opportunity that you don't often get.
Sure. I think and is there other factors like you know you said okay I'm thinking about moving into gaming. Are there other categories on that list, or really gaming seems to be a focus for you right now?
Categories on the list in terms of what I'm interested in.
Like
I'm
the
just
kind
making
of
sure.
companies you want to work for?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, gaming was actually something that I came to rather recently, um, rather late in the game, that I'll actually say, especially for MBA internships. Most of what I've been interested in is actually small scale healthcare interoperability, price transparency kind of business models that are arising in the space now, right? So like
Sure.
Teladoc is one that everybody knows, right? There's a company called Optimize Health, right? Remote patient monitoring, essentially putting together big, uh, I almost said call centers, but control centers, command centers, where they're monitoring patients around the nation and essentially reducing the amount, consolidating all of the services that you would need so that it's more efficient for, hospitals to run their operations, for example, right? And they can use nursing staff better at peak times.
Well,
Um,
I would say then it might make sense for you as a next step, at least in pursuing this game interest, to
mhm.
shortlist a number of positions that you think might be a good fit for you. Maybe that's an associate producer, maybe that's a producer on a game, and then looking at the requirements and seeing if that excites you, like those responsibilities, and particularly finding people in the industry who are doing those specific roles and figuring out if their day to day resonates with you. You know, maybe doing an informational interview with them and seeing like, okay, is this something I would find myself smiling if I was doing on a day to day basis?
Yeah, I think that that's great advice. I think that that's absolutely great advice, and I haven't necessarily gone and done that yet. So I think that that's a really good next step that I'll take.
Right on, man. All
I
right. Well,
appreciate
good
it.
luck, Nick, and I hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you. I hope to hear good things from you as well. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks
Bye.
again, Matthew.
You're welcome. All right. Well, that wraps up the day. Hopefully, everybody goes on and does awesome stuff. And if you watch this video, hopefully you learned something along the way, and good luck to you as well.